"Bring in the officers," the judge said, her voice steady, controlled, final, and for a brief second, the entire courtroom seemed to forget how to breathe. Two uniformed men stood frozen at the center, their confidence gone, their eyes flickering with something they couldn't quite name yet. And just before the gavel came down, just before the truth had a chance to speak, everything cut to black. Rewind 12 hours earlier, under the cold white glow of a gas station canopy, somewhere off Highway 61, where the night air carried that quiet, restless tension you only feel when something is about to go wrong. Ava Carter stood beside pump number 4, one hand resting lightly on the nozzle as the numbers ticked upward. $12.43, $12.44, $12.45. Her reflection faintly visible in the dark glass of her car. A late-model sedan with clean lines and no reason to attract attention. She wore a simple navy coat, her hair pulled back, her posture calm, composed, the kind of stillness that didn't ask for space but somehow commanded it anyway. Across the lot, a patrol car rolled in slow, deliberate, tires crunching softly over loose gravel, headlights cutting through the dim corners like a question no one had asked out loud. Inside sat Officer Ryan Cole and Officer Daniel Brooks, their silhouettes shifting as they scanned the scene, their attention settling, lingering. On her, there was nothing unusual about her presence, nothing out of place, and yet the air shifted the moment their doors opened. You could feel it, that subtle change, like the temperature dropping just enough for your skin to notice. Ryan adjusted his belt as he stepped forward, Daniel trailing half a step behind, both carrying that quiet authority that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. Ava didn't look up immediately. She let the pump click, let the silence stretch just a second longer before turning her head, her eyes meeting theirs with a calm that didn't match the situation that was already forming. "Evening, ma'am," Ryan said. But there was something underneath the words, something colder than courtesy. Ava gave a small nod, nothing more, her voice even when she replied, "Evening, officer." And for a moment, just a moment, it could have ended there, but it didn't. Daniel circled slightly, his gaze moving from the car to her hands to her face, as if searching for something that hadn't been given to him. Ryan stepped closer, just enough to close the space, just enough to make it clear this wasn't a casual stop. "Mind telling us what you're doing out here this late?" he asked, though the answer was obvious, though the pump was still humming quietly between them. Ava didn't react, not the way most people would, not with confusion or irritation. She simply met his gaze again, steady, grounded, and said, "Getting gas." And something about the simplicity of that answer seemed to irritate him, more than anything else could have. A flicker of tension passed between the two officers, unspoken but understood, and somewhere in the background, a car drove by without slowing, its headlights briefly illuminating the scene before disappearing into the night. Imagine standing there, under those lights, feeling the weight of eyes that had already decided something about you before you even spoke. Ava didn't shift, didn't step back, didn't raise her voice. She just stood there, quiet, present, watching as the moment stretched into something heavier, something irreversible. And as Ryan's expression hardened, as Daniel's hand hovered just a little too close to his radio, Ava spoke again, softer this time, but somehow louder in the silence. "You're making a mistake." And neither of them realized, not yet, that those 4 words would be the last moment they ever felt in control. Ryan did not respond right away, and that silence said more than any words could have. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her face as if trying to place something he could not quite understand, while Daniel shifted his weight beside him, the faint crackle of his radio breaking the stillness for just a second before fading again into the background. The gas pump clicked, a sharp mechanical sound that echoed louder than it should have, signaling the tank was full, but neither of them moved to step back. Neither of them acknowledged the simple, ordinary end of a routine moment. Instead, Ryan tilted his head just enough to signal a change in tone, a shift from casual to something more deliberate, more controlled. "We have had reports in this area," he said slowly, each word measured. "So we are going to need to check a few things." And there it was, the justification that always sounded official enough to pass, vague enough to avoid questions. Ava glanced down briefly as she returned the nozzle to its place, her movements calm, precise, unhurried, as if she were operating on a different timeline entirely, one that did not bend under pressure. When she looked back up, her expression had not changed, not even slightly, and that seemed to unsettle them more than anything else could have. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice steady, not confrontational, just clear, and for a moment, just a moment, Daniel hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Ryan as if waiting for direction. Ryan stepped closer, closing the space completely now, the overhead light casting a sharp shadow across his face. "Step away from the vehicle," he said, no longer a request, and the shift was immediate, undeniable. Around them, the night continued as if nothing had changed, a distant car pulling into the far end of the lot, a flicker of movement near the convenience store window. But here, under that single pool of light, everything tightened. Ava did not move right away, and that pause, that single, controlled breath, seemed to stretch the moment even further. Imagine knowing exactly what is happening, feeling the weight of it before it fully unfolds, and still choosing not to react. She stepped back, slowly, deliberately, her hands visible, her posture straight, her eyes never leaving theirs. Daniel moved to the side of the car, peering inside through the window, his reflection blending with the dark interior, while Ryan's voice came again, firmer this time. "Do you have identification on you?" Ava nodded once, reaching into her coat with a careful, measured motion, pulling out a slim wallet and handing it over without hesitation. Ryan took it, flipping it open, scanning quickly, then again, slower this time, as if the information in front of him did not match what he expected to see. His jaw tightened, just slightly, a subtle shift that might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But Ava saw it. She always saw it. Daniel returned, his tone low but edged with something uncertain. "Everything looks clean," he muttered, but Ryan did not respond, his focus still fixed on the card in his hand. The air felt heavier now, thicker, like something unspoken was pressing in from all sides. A faint vibration came from Ava's pocket, her phone lighting briefly before going still again, the screen flashing a name that neither officer fully caught, something official, something that did not belong in this moment. But Ryan closed the wallet before it could mean anything, before it could change anything. He handed it back with a slight nod that carried no apology, no acknowledgement, just authority. "We are going to need you to come with us," he said, and there it was, the line that crossed from inconvenience into something else entirely. Ava took the wallet, her fingers steady, her expression unchanged, but her eyes held something now, something deeper, something that did not match the situation they thought they were controlling. She did not argue, did not raise her voice, did not ask why. Instead, she looked at them both, one after the other, and spoke quietly, almost like a reminder rather than a warning. "You still have time to reconsider." And neither of them understood that this was not defiance, not fear, but the last moment they would ever have to walk away from what was coming next. The words hung in the air longer than they should have, as if even the night itself was waiting to see what they would do with them. But Ryan only let out a quiet breath through his nose, the kind that carried more dismissal than thought, and Daniel shifted again, glancing briefly toward the convenience store where a couple of people had started to notice, their movements slowing just enough to turn curiosity into attention. "That is not how this works," Ryan said, his voice flattening into something practiced, something final, and with that, the space between them changed completely. Ava did not respond right away, not because she did not have something to say, but because she understood something they did not, that once a moment like this crossed a certain line, it did not return to where it started. She gave a small nod, almost to herself, as if acknowledging a decision that had just been made, and then she placed her hands calmly at her sides, her posture still composed, still unshaken. Daniel reached for his radio, speaking quietly into it, his words low and procedural, but the tone carried a slight tension now, something that had not been there before, something that came from standing too close to a situation that did not feel as simple as it was supposed to be. A faint breeze moved through the lot, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the soft flicker of the overhead lights, and for a second, everything felt suspended, like the world had slowed just enough for the weight of what was happening to settle in. Imagine standing there, knowing you are being moved into something you did not choose, watching every step unfold in real time, and realizing that no one around you is going to interrupt it. Ryan gestured toward the patrol car with a short motion of his hand. Not aggressive, not loud, just firm enough to leave no room for interpretation. Ava turned without resistance, her steps measured, her pace steady, as if she were walking into something she had already seen before. As she moved, her phone vibrated again, more persistent this time, the glow of the screen briefly lighting through the fabric of her coat, and for just a fraction of a second, Daniel noticed it, his eyes narrowing slightly, curiosity flickering across his face, but he said nothing. And the moment passed, the back door of the patrol car opened. With a soft mechanical click, and Ava paused just before stepping in, her gaze lifting once more to meet Ryan's, not with anger, not with fear, but with something quieter, something heavier. "You are choosing this," she said, her voice low, steady, and for the first time, there was a subtle shift in Ryan's expression, not doubt exactly, but something close to it, something that did not have time to fully form before it was pushed aside. "Get in the car," he replied, and just like that, the hesitation disappeared, replaced by the same controlled certainty he had carried from the beginning. Ava lowered herself into the seat without another word, the door closing behind her with a muted thud that seemed louder than it should have been. Outside, Daniel moved toward the driver's side, his movements a little quicker now, his jaw set as if trying to keep pace with something that was starting to slip. Ryan remained standing for a moment longer, looking through the window at Ava, who sat upright, hands resting calmly in her lap, her eyes forward, her expression unreadable. There was no panic there, no urgency, none of the reactions he had come to expect in moments like this, and that absence lingered, pressing against the edges of his certainty in a way he could not explain. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly, not close enough to matter, just enough to remind him of the system he believed he understood, the structure he thought he controlled. He turned away, climbing into the passenger seat, the door closing with a final click, and as the engine started and the patrol car began to move, the gas station lights faded behind them, shrinking into the darkness as if nothing had happened at all. But inside the car, the silence grew heavier with every passing mile, and in the reflection of the rearview mirror, Ava's eyes remained steady, watching, waiting, as if the real moment had not even begun yet. The patrol car moved steadily down the empty road, tires humming against the asphalt as the last traces of the gas station disappeared behind them, swallowed by the darkness like a moment no one would ever question again. But inside the vehicle the air felt different, heavier, filled with something neither officer was willing to name. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his hands fixed at 10 and 2, his posture rigid in a way that suggested focus but carried something closer to unease, while Ryan leaned back slightly in the passenger seat, one arm resting against the door, watching the side mirror as if the reflection might confirm that everything was still under control. In the back seat, Ava sat quietly, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of passing streetlights, each flash of light revealing the same thing over and over again. Calm, composed, untouched by the tension that seemed to tighten with every mile. Imagine sitting there, knowing exactly where you are being taken, knowing exactly how this will play out, and still choosing silence because you understand that timing matters more than reaction. The radio crackled softly, a dispatcher's voice cutting through the stillness with routine updates that had nothing to do with them. Ordinary calls, ordinary voices, the kind of background noise that made moments like this feel even more isolated. Daniel adjusted his grip on the wheel, glancing briefly into the rearview mirror, his eyes meeting Ava's for just a second before shifting away. And something about that look stayed with him, not fear, not anger, but certainty, the kind that did not belong in the back of a patrol car. "You said she had reports tied to this area?" Daniel asked quietly, his voice low enough to keep the question contained between them, and Ryan did not answer right away, his jaw tightening slightly as he stared ahead. "We are following procedure," Ryan replied finally, but the words sounded thinner now, less solid than they had before, like something repeated rather than believed. Ava did not interrupt, did not lean forward, did not try to insert herself into the conversation, but her presence filled the space anyway, a quiet pressure that made every word feel heavier than it Should have. Her phone vibrated again, longer this time, the sound soft but persistent in the confined space. And for a moment Daniel's eyes flicked toward it again, curiosity growing into something harder to ignore, but Ryan reached back without turning, his voice firm. "Turn that off." And Ava responded without hesitation, her movements smooth as she silenced the device, placing it back into her coat as if the interruption had never happened. The car slowed as they approached an intersection, the red light casting a dull glow across the dashboard, painting everything in a muted shade that made the moment feel suspended, unreal. Ryan shifted slightly, glancing over his shoulder for the first time since they had left the station, his eyes landing on Ava, searching, measuring, trying to find something he could define, something that fit into the narrative he had already decided. "You have been very calm," he said, the words carrying a hint of challenge now, as if he expected a reaction, as if he needed one to confirm something. Ava met his gaze without hesitation, her expression unchanged, her voice steady. Calm does not mean unaware, and the simplicity of the statement seemed to settle into the car like a weight. The light turned green, and Daniel pressed the accelerator, the vehicle moving forward again, but the rhythm had shifted. The certainty that had filled the first few miles now replaced by something less stable, something that did not sit as easily. Outside, the city grew quieter, buildings thinning, the road stretching ahead with fewer signs of life. And yet inside the car, the silence grew louder, pressing in from all sides. Ryan turned back to face forward, but his posture had changed, just enough to suggest that something had started to slip, something small but undeniable. In the back seat, Ava closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in exhaustion, not in resignation, but in patience, as if she were allowing the moment to move exactly where it needed to go. Because what they still did not understand, what neither of them could see yet, was that this was not the peak of the situation, not the moment where power was decided, but the quiet build before it shifted completely, and by the time they realized it, there would be no space left to step back. The patrol car turned into the station lot just as the clock on the dashboard rolled past 11:42 p.m., the tires crunching softly over the uneven concrete as the building came into view, its fluorescent lights casting that familiar sterile glow that made everything feel colder than it really was. The station sat quiet, almost indifferent, as if it had seen too many nights like this to care anymore. And as the engine slowed to a stop, the silence inside the car deepened, thick and pressing, like something waiting to break, but holding itself back. Daniel exhaled slowly, his grip loosening slightly on the wheel, as if he had just completed something routine, something expected, but the tension in his shoulders did not follow. It stayed, lingering in a way he could not quite explain. Ryan opened his door first, stepping out into the night air with the same controlled posture, the same steady confidence he had carried from the beginning. But there was a subtle difference now, something quieter, something less certain beneath the surface. He walked around the vehicle, the overhead light flickering briefly as he reached for the back door, pausing for just a fraction of a second before opening it. And when he did, Ava stepped out without being asked, her movements smooth, composed, as if she had already anticipated every step of this process long before it began. Imagine walking into a place where you are supposed to feel smaller, quieter, controlled, and instead feeling nothing at all except clarity. Inside the station, the air carried that familiar mix of paper, coffee, and something harder to define, something that clung to the walls after years of unspoken moments. A desk officer glanced up briefly as they entered, his eyes moving from Ryan to Daniel, and then settling on Ava, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly before returning to neutral, as if something about her presence did not quite align with the situation being presented. "What do we have?" he asked casually, his tone routine, but his gaze lingered just a second longer than necessary. Ryan responded without hesitation, his voice steady. "Suspicious activity, possible connection to recent reports," the words falling into place like they had been rehearsed, like they had been used before. Ava stood quietly beside them, her posture unchanged, her eyes taking in the room with a calm awareness that seemed out of place, not scanning in panic, not searching for exits, but observing, noting, understanding. Daniel moved toward the processing desk, picking up a clipboard, his movements slightly quicker now, as if focusing on procedure could anchor him back in his certainty. "Name," he said, not looking up at first, his pen hovering above the paper, and Ava answered clearly. "Ava Carter," her voice steady, her tone unchanged, and for a brief moment, the pen in Daniel's hand hesitated, just enough to leave a faint mark where the ink pressed. Too hard before continuing. "Address," he asked, and again she answered without pause, each word precise, controlled, leaving no room for confusion. The desk officer leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing just a fraction as he listened, something about the interaction pulling at his attention. But he said nothing. Not yet. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang, sharp and sudden, breaking the rhythm of the room before being answered quickly, the sound fading into the background like everything else that did not matter in this moment. Ryan stepped closer to the desk, placing Ava's identification down with a firm motion, as if reinforcing the narrative he had already committed to, but the desk officer picked it up more carefully than expected, his eyes scanning it once, then again, slower this time, and the shift was immediate, subtle but undeniable. His posture straightened, his expression tightening just enough to signal that something had changed, something that did not match the situation unfolding in front of him. Daniel noticed it first, his gaze flicking up from the clipboard, his voice lowering slightly. "Everything all right?" And the desk officer did not answer right away, his eyes still fixed on the card in his hand before slowly lifting to meet Ava's. And in that moment, the air in the room seemed to shift, like a quiet realization beginning to form. Ava did not speak, did not move. But there was something in the way she stood there, something in the stillness, that made the silence louder than any reaction could have been. Ryan frowned slightly, his confidence pressing forward against the uncertainty now creeping in. "Is there a problem?" he asked, and the desk officer finally exhaled, placing the identification down carefully, almost deliberately, as if the weight of it had suddenly changed. "You might want to take a closer look at this," he said quietly, his voice no longer casual, no longer routine. And for the first time since the night began, the structure Ryan believed he was standing on shifted just enough to crack beneath him, not breaking yet, but no longer solid, no longer certain. And in that moment, Ava's earlier words echoed in the silence, not loud, not forceful, but undeniable. "You are choosing this." Ryan did not reach for the identification right away, and that hesitation, that single break in his usual rhythm, said more than any reaction could have. Because up until this moment, everything had followed a pattern he understood, a sequence he had repeated enough times to believe it was always right. But now the pattern had shifted, and he could feel it even before he fully saw it. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice still firm but carrying a thin edge that had not been there before. And the desk officer did not answer immediately, instead sliding the card slightly closer across the counter, a quiet gesture that felt heavier than it should have. Daniel leaned in first, his eyes scanning the identification quickly, then again, slower, his brow tightening as something began to register, something that did not fit into the situation they had constructed. The room seemed to grow quieter, the distant sounds of phones and footsteps fading into the background as the focus narrowed to that single moment at the desk. Imagine realizing that the story you thought you were controlling is no longer yours to tell, that the roles have already begun to shift, and you are just now catching up to it. Ryan stepped forward, finally picking up the card, his fingers closing around it with a grip that was just a little too tight. And as his eyes moved across the surface, the change was immediate, not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. His posture stiffened, his expression tightening in a way that was almost imperceptible, but enough to signal that something inside him had just recalibrated. The name was the same, Ava Carter, but it was not the name that held his attention. It was everything attached to it, the title, the designation, the quiet authority printed in a way that did not need explanation. For a brief second, the room seemed to hold its breath, as if even the walls were waiting to see what he would do next. Daniel straightened beside him, his earlier uncertainty now sharpening into something closer to concern, his voice lower, more controlled. "Ryan." But he did not finish the sentence, because there was nothing simple left to say. Ava stood exactly where she had been the entire time, her hands relaxed, her shoulders steady, her gaze level, not watching them in fear, not reacting to the shift, but allowing it to unfold at its own pace. She did not need to speak, because the moment was already speaking for her. Ryan lowered the identification slowly, placing it back on the counter with a care that had not been there before, his confidence no longer leading the room, now adjusting, recalculating, searching for ground that no longer felt solid. "Is this current?" he asked, and even as the words left his mouth, they sounded weaker than he intended, like a question he already knew the answer to. The desk officer gave a small nod, his expression now fully serious. No trace of earlier casualness remaining. "As of last week," he said quietly, and the weight of that statement settled into the space between them. Daniel exhaled under his breath, the sound barely audible but heavy with realization, his mind moving quickly now, replaying the past hour, the gas station, the questions, the decisions, each moment stacking on top of the next in a way that no longer felt routine. Ryan turned slightly, his gaze shifting toward Ava for the first time since seeing the identification. And in that moment, everything he thought he understood about the situation unraveled just enough to expose the truth beneath it. She met his eyes without hesitation, her expression unchanged, but there was something there now, something clearer, something that had been present from the beginning but unseen. "You had every opportunity to pause," she said softly, her voice calm, not accusatory, not raised, just precise, and the words landed heavier than any confrontation could have. No one moved for a second, no one spoke, because there was nothing left to interrupt the realization that had already taken hold. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed, the sound echoing faintly through the station, grounding the moment back into reality. But nothing about it felt the same anymore. Ryan straightened, his posture adjusting as if trying to recover some sense of control. But it was different now, not the same authority, not the same certainty, because this was no longer his scene to direct. This was something else entirely, something that had already shifted beyond his reach. Ava stepped forward then, just a small movement, but enough to change the balance of the room, her presence no longer that of someone being processed, but of someone who had always belonged on the other side of the desk. And as the silence stretched, as the weight of the moment settled fully into place, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was not the end of what they had started, it was the beginning of what they would have to answer for. No one spoke at first, because there are moments when silence does more than words ever could, moments when everything that needs to be understood is already hanging in the air, waiting for someone to acknowledge it. And this was one of those moments. Ryan stood there, still facing Ava, but the distance between them no longer felt the same. It was no longer defined by authority, but by realization. By the quiet collapse of a narrative he had built without question. Daniel shifted slightly. Beside him, his eyes moving between Ava and the desk officer, his mind trying to catch up to what had already changed, replaying every step, every word, every decision that had led them here. And for the first time that night, uncertainty was no longer a flicker, it was fully present. Ava did not move right away. She did not rush to explain or correct or assert anything, because she did not need to. The moment was already unfolding exactly as it should. Imagine standing in a room where the power has just shifted and no one has said it out loud yet. But everyone feels it, everyone knows it, and there is no way to pretend otherwise. The desk officer cleared his throat softly, breaking the stillness just enough to bring the moment back into motion. "Do you want me to notify the supervisor?" he asked, his voice careful now, measured, and Ryan did not answer immediately, his jaw tightening as he looked down briefly, then back up, as if searching for something to hold on to, something familiar, but finding nothing that fit anymore. "No," he said finally, but the word came out slower than usual, less certain, like it was being reconsidered even as it was spoken. Ava's gaze remained steady, not pressing, not forcing, but present in a way that made avoidance impossible, and after a brief pause, she spoke again, her voice calm, precise. "You have already involved more than you realize," and the statement settled into the room with quiet weight. Daniel glanced toward Ryan, his voice lower now, no longer trying to assert control, but searching for direction. "We should probably document everything exactly as it happened." And that word, exactly, seemed to land harder than expected because it carried implications neither of them could ignore. Ryan exhaled slowly, running a hand along his jaw as he turned slightly away, the movement small but revealing, the first sign that he was no longer operating from certainty but from adjustment. "That is what we are doing," he replied. But even he could hear the difference in his tone, the shift from confidence to something more cautious. Ava took a small step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, just enough to close the space that had separated them. And in that movement, the dynamic shifted again, quietly but completely. "Then start from the beginning," she said, and there was no edge in her voice, no anger, just clarity, the kind that does not need to be raised to be heard. The desk officer reached for a fresh form, his movements more deliberate now, as if he understood the weight of what was about to be written, each detail no longer routine, but significant. Daniel moved closer to the desk, his earlier hesitation replaced by a focused urgency, the need to get it right, to make sure nothing was missed, nothing was left open to interpretation. Ryan remained still for a moment longer, his eyes briefly meeting Ava's again, and in that exchange, something unspoken passed between them, not forgiveness, not confrontation, but recognition, the acknowledgement that the situation had already moved beyond what either of them could control. Somewhere in the station, a clock ticked softly, marking time that now felt more important than before, each second adding weight to what was being set in motion. Ava folded her hands lightly in front of her, her posture composed, her presence grounded, not as someone waiting for permission, but as someone who understood exactly what would come next. Because this was no longer about what had happened at the gas station, it was about what would follow, what would be examined, what would be questioned, and what would have to be answered. And as the pen touched the paper, as the first words of the report began to form, one truth settled into the room with quiet certainty. This was no longer their version of events. This was the record, and it would not bend to fit anything less than the truth. The pen moved slowly at first, each word placed with care, as if the act of writing had become something heavier than routine, something that demanded precision not just in detail, but in truth. And Daniel leaned closer over the desk, his voice steady but quieter now, recounting the sequence step by step, the time, the location, the initial approach, every element laid out in a way that no longer allowed assumptions to fill the gaps. Ryan stood just behind him, listening, not interrupting, not correcting, but absorbing, his earlier certainty replaced by a careful silence that revealed more than any argument could have. Ava remained still, her presence unchanged, but now the room seemed to orient around her, not because she demanded it, but because the situation itself had shifted its center. Imagine watching a story unfold and realizing that the ending has already been written, not by force, but by the quiet accumulation of facts that cannot be undone. The desk officer paused, occasionally, glancing up from the form as if measuring the weight of what was being documented, each sentence no longer just a record, but a reflection of choices made in real time. "And what was the basis for the initial stop?" he asked, his tone neutral but precise, and Daniel hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering, his voice controlled. "Observed behavior that appeared inconsistent with normal activity in the area," the words sounding official, but thinner now, less anchored than before. The officer nodded slowly, writing it down, but the pause that followed lingered, as if the room itself was considering the answer. Ava's gaze remained steady, not challenging, not interrupting, but present in a way that made every word feel exposed, every detail subject to quiet scrutiny. Ryan shifted slightly, his posture tightening as he stepped forward. "We followed protocol," he added, his voice firm. But there was something in the delivery that suggested he was no longer fully convinced by the statement himself. The desk officer looked up again, this time holding Ryan's gaze for a moment longer. "Then the report will reflect exactly that," he said, and the emphasis on exactly carried more weight than the word itself. Somewhere nearby, a printer hummed to life, the sound mechanical and indifferent, as if the system continued regardless of who stood within it. Ava finally moved, just a slight adjustment of her stance, her hands resting lightly against the edge of the desk, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, measured, but unmistakably clear. Accuracy matters now more than it did before, and the statement settled into the room like a final confirmation of what had already changed. Daniel nodded almost instinctively, his focus sharpening as he continued, adding details he might have overlooked earlier, small things, the time stamps, the exact wording, the sequence of events, because now each piece mattered. Each element would stand on its own. Ryan remained quiet, his eyes moving between the form and Ava, as if trying to reconcile the two, the written account and the person who now stood beyond the role he had assigned her. The desk officer finished the final line, setting the pen down with a soft tap that echoed more than it should have, and for a moment, no one moved. The document lay there between them, not just a report, but a record of a moment that could not be reshaped, could not be softened, could not be explained away. Ava glanced down briefly, her eyes scanning the page, without touching it, without altering it, and then she looked back up, her expression unchanged, her voice steady. This is where it begins to matter, and no one questioned what she meant, because they all understood now. This was no longer about what they thought had happened. This was about what could be proven, what would be examined, and what would follow them. Beyond this room, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, filled with the weight of realization, the kind that does not need to be spoken to be understood. And as the clock on the wall ticked forward, marking the slow passage of time, one truth settled into place with quiet certainty. The moment they thought was routine had already become something else entirely, something that would not end here, something that would carry forward into a place where every detail would be seen, heard, and remembered exactly as it was. The room did not change, not in any visible way. The same lights, the same desks, the same quiet hum of a station that had seen countless nights pass through its walls, but something inside it had shifted, something that could not be undone. And as the report rested on the desk between them, the weight of it settled into every corner of the space. Ryan looked at it for a moment longer, his eyes tracing the lines as if searching for something he could still control, something he could still adjust. But there was nothing left to move, nothing left to reshape, because the moment had already been fixed in place. Daniel stepped back slightly, his posture no longer rigid but grounded, as if he had accepted the shift, as if he understood that what mattered now was not defending what had happened, but facing it exactly as it was. Ava stood across from them, her presence steady, unchanged from the moment this began. But now it carried something different, not just quiet strength, but clarity, the kind that comes when everything unnecessary has been stripped away. Imagine reaching the point where nothing else needs to be said because the truth has already filled the room, because every detail has already spoken for itself. The desk officer gathered the paperwork carefully, aligning the edges before setting it aside, his movements deliberate, respectful, as if acknowledging that this was no longer just another file, but something that would move forward, something that would be seen again. A faint sound echoed from down the hall, footsteps passing, a door opening and closing, the ordinary rhythm of the station continuing without pause. But here, in this moment, everything felt still. Ryan finally exhaled, a slow release of breath that carried more than fatigue. It carried realization, the kind that does not come all at once, but settles in piece by piece until it can no longer be ignored. He straightened slightly, not with the same authority he had carried before, but with something quieter, something closer to acceptance. And when he looked at Ava again, there was no challenge left in his expression, only recognition. Ava met his gaze for a brief moment, then shifted her attention to the report, then back to him. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, but final. What happens next is not decided here. And the words landed with quiet certainty, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a fact. Daniel nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding that this moment was only a beginning, not an end, that the real weight of it would unfold beyond these walls, in places where every action would be examined without assumption, without shortcuts, without the comfort of control. The clock on the wall ticked forward again, marking another second, another step away from what this had been and closer to what it would become. Ava turned then, not abruptly, not with urgency, but with purpose, her steps measured as she moved toward the exit, her posture unchanged, her presence leaving behind a silence that felt fuller than before. No one stopped her. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to hold her there. Nothing left to question. The door opened softly, the night air slipping in for just a moment before it closed again, and with it, the last trace of the moment as it had been. Ryan remained where he stood, his gaze fixed on the space where she had been, and in that stillness, one thought settled in with quiet clarity. He had believed the badge defined the law, but tonight, he had learned something different, because the law does not raise its voice. It does not demand attention. It simply waits, steady and unyielding, until the moment comes when it no longer needs to explain itself. And when that moment arrives, there is nothing left to argue, nothing left to control, only the truth, standing exactly where it has always been.